Welcome to Courageous Dialogues, podcast where I try and get to the heart of the matter with people in your community. In this podcast, I talk with Associate Professor Therese Keane, who has a wealth of experience around IT in education. I might get you started, and if you can introduce yourself to everyone and just a little bit about your background.
Sure. Hi, Tanya. Thanks for having me. My name's Associate Professor Therese Keane. I'm at Swinburne University of Technology. I've been a classroom teacher for 17 years in secondary schools, where I've been a director of IT as well as taught IT across the board, and particularly VCE IT. I've co-authored many of the textbooks that students use at VCE for probably the last 27 years. So my background really is that IT and education, and I've been in tertiary since 2011, and I have done a lot of research in technology and education and how children, and when I say children, I mean young children, primary school children, adolescents, secondary school kids, how do they actually use technology? And also I look at it from the perspective from teachers, parents, principals, and obviously students. So I look at the stakeholders in terms of how technology is used and emerging technologies as well.
So I'm just going to carry on from what you just said, because I've got two kids. I'll call them kids, that they're adults now. My son is doing engineering, and we've been having conversations about engineering and with my daughter, girls' education. So last night we were having a bit of a conversation, and I asked Kieran, who's doing engineering, when he decided that he wanted to do engineering, he wasn't going down the whole IT path. And I remember after his first year, they had to do a compulsory IT unit as part of the engineering course. So he was doing engineering and science. And I remember the day he came home and he said, "Mum, I think I'm going to follow your footsteps." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "I'm really loving software development, and I think I'm going to just scrap the whole science thing and scrap what I was thinking about, and I'm going to go down the software development path." And so we were having that conversation last night, and I said to, my kids, "Did you enjoy IT when you were in secondary, And they both said actually no. They didn't have an opportunity to explore. Kieran was saying he didn't have an opportunity to explore what he's doing now in detail, and it was only because of that compulsory unit as part of his engineering course that he found the passion for IT." So I'm going to bring these two things together. There was an article that was written, I'm sure you've seen it, it's all over LinkedIn and all over social media, about 2 days ago, about girls and mathematics. It was in The Age, Girls' School Buck Decline in Maths Participation by Lauren Bridge. And they talk about girls pretty much performing really well in girls' schools with that in terms of the opportunities that they get. So I'm thinking about Kieran, I know he's a boy, but I'm thinking about what he said. It was because of that compulsory unit that has led him to take up software development. So now this article suggests that we have more girls' school, and that's nice, but we've got probably, 2% or something girls' school. It's not going to happen. How do we provide that opportunity later on to girls in co-ed schools?
So the question I've got to ask you before I answer your question,
Yeah.
referring to opportunities for kids to do computing or mathematics? I just wasn't clear as to
STEM subjects. So STEM subjects in general, but you know, you come from the IT sort of STEM lens. So I guess maybe let's focus in on our IT and the
let's start with
STEM
your
subjects.
son. Let's break it down logically.
Yeah, very good.
And let's look at your son's, I guess, his trajectory to tertiary. From my experience, what we have, I'm going to say we, myself, and the research I've done, what we have found is that a lot of what takes place in a school is really dependent on the teacher in terms of what's taught. And because anywhere from year 7 to 10 it's deemed to be an elective subject, it may say that, yes, you may need to teach programming, but you don't necessarily, it's not mandated what type of programming experience you have. So you might have a school where at year 7 and 8 and up to even year 9, they teach Scratch. But keep in mind, the student has done Scratch throughout primary school, but they come to secondary school and they're all on an equal level so that it's all equalized, but they don't necessarily take into account differentiation of students who may be, you know, even having their own business, their own e-commerce business, or writing their own apps. So there's really no consideration for that accelerated path for those students who have it. So to some extent, they hold kids back from that point. Whereas you have other schools where they then come in at year 7, year 8, and the school decides we're going to teach Python, and they have another equally disappointing experience because a lot of kids may not have any programming background, or they don't particularly care for programming, and having to do this language that is not exactly rocking their boat or exciting them turns them off. Now, if we take a step back, even when we go into primary school, we know that most of the teachers in general are they're not specialist teachers, so what we call generalist teachers. So in, you know, primary teacher education, they have to learn how to do a little bit of everything from PE to art to teaching mathematics to teaching science. But that doesn't mean that the actual student who comes in to do initial teacher education actually comes from a background. So they're not necessarily scientists, or they're not linguists, or they're not artists. And so they're these generalist students who come in and they need to know something about everything. And we know that programming is a very complex area. It's very complicated. There's a methodology in how to teach, you know, computing. And so you may end up having experiences in primary school where the teacher doesn't actually know, you know, doesn't know as much, or doesn't know even more complex things in programming, and they're just barely surviving and barely teaching and being, you know, perhaps a step ahead of the students, or in some cases they don't even try it themselves and they just give it to the students and get, you know, students to teach one another or help one another, because they're just so frightened that they're going to be found out that there's imposter here, you know, I don't know anything about programming. So what it really does is that it means that the students who come through don't necessarily have an equal pathway, or they don't have equal exposure to computing, and they don't have equal opportunities in terms of their programming experience. And again, you know, the teachers are not confident how to teach this. And there's a course, there's the digital technologies course coming off the Australian curriculum. And whilst that's fantastic, and we've got something mandated, which, you know, was ad hoc before, the problem is we don't have teachers that are all comfortable to teach it and are confident to teach it. So we have this problem that then sort of follows students through right up to, you know, secondary school, where they come in, they might, you know, the teacher who teaches it may not necessarily be an IT teacher in secondary. They might be a mathematics teacher or a STEM teacher, and their load needed to be filled up, or the school doesn't have enough IT teachers. And so you've got someone teaching how to program, and they may not necessarily be enthusiastic or particularly have that waiting on the importance of it. And so they teach it, they go through the motions, student goes, oh. Or I've also heard where students are taught when they come into year 7 in the IT subject, how to manipulate files and put files away and have filing systems on their computers. And that's what they consider in computing. Or again, I was actually quite disappointed when I heard not long ago that there are some schools still teaching spreadsheets and spreadsheet exercises. And so I just think, haven't we moved on from here? What about making it fun? What about demystifying what computing is about? And so, this is a very long answer to your question, but if the student has a very positive experience and gets hooked by the experience and gets hooked by a teacher who understands and can actually tap into the student's interests, then students will no doubt follow that teacher, will follow the subject on right through. And so that's where I think we have the big disconnect. So obviously going back to your son, where he didn't obviously enjoy his secondary experience of computing, but he's gone in at tertiary and somehow, somewhere he's seen the relevance, it's clicked. He feels like, wow, this is powerful. This is where I want to be. That's what we need more of in the secondary. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I did say what made it click. And he said, I could spend hours in the beginning on a problem and not realize until like 3-4 hours how much time I've spent on it, and it was really enjoyable. So yes, so let's just say everything's aligned. You've got a teacher that's well skilled. They've been through courses, they're your expert. And they go into a school. You've got a little bit of a background in terms of, what is it, is it humanoid? How do you say it? Like the human sort of robots?
Humanoid robots, yeah.
Okay. So let's just say I've got the expertise. I'm in a school. I'm in a co-ed school. I have got robots and stuff. You've actually developed quite a few, is it software development courses for VCE? Is there a place for robotics such as drones and MBOTs and all of those sorts of things in year 10, 11 and 12?
Look, I'm going to start with the easy one. At years 11 and 12, the curriculum is prescribed. And so at, in the VC applied computing course, the curriculum is, already prescribed. So you have to do things to meet the exam at the end. And so it's a little bit harder to have that creativity. But if we go down a little bit, so if we look at year 10, year 9, year 8, year 7, there is that flexibility. So it's not high stakes. And so absolutely, that's the place where you put things like this in, you challenge the students, you hook them, you get them really interested so that there is that interest. And, to some extent, it's a little bit like reading. I've heard students complain that they absolutely loathe the books that schools make them read in English, and they just don't like having to manipulate text, read through it, find meaning. But when they finish school, they come back to reading because they like reading their own books, their own choice, and they love the whole idea, but they don't necessarily like that defined way of having to understand text. So I think computing is in that, similar to some extent in that sort of analogy where, if you sort of show students drones and robots and get them interested, that could be a side hobby. And even when they're finishing their, year 11, year 12, where it's heavy duty, they're really, working towards the ATAR. When they finish, they can go back and play with these toys. They can program it. They can do some, some wonderful things. Mm-hmm. But the important part is getting them hooked early on.
Okay, so can you actually hook girls with robotics? And you're very big in this space, RoboCats.
Yeah, we had the RoboCats. Yeah.
For a good 4 or 5 years, you were the only girl team. Yeah, talk us a little bit about that and how, because there's a perception there that girls don't like robotics and they have a different lens when it comes to computers. Is that actually true, first of all? And can we use robots to engage the girls?
Absolutely, absolutely. And look, some girls like football. Not everyone likes football, but some girls do. Some people like rugby. I mean, it's different interests for different people, and we can't use the same brush across all girls and say girls don't like robotics, girls don't like computers. There are girls who are interested. There are girls who've had no opportunities, and so they come into different sorts of interventions or programs, and it opens their eyes because they haven't had that experience. And we did something similar with the RoboCats, where we created this intervention or this program, and we had girls come in and we taught them about programming, we taught them about design, building, solving a problem. They worked with computer scientists, engineers, project managers, builders, you name it. There was quite a lot of people we were able to find, sponsors, industry mentors, university mentors, and they all worked with the girls to try and get them to understand. They had questions that they, wanted answered, but they were shy to ask. And when they realized they were working with people one-on-one, they were able to ask these questions. And so that built their confidence, and they really wanted to do more. So what we did was we also registered them to compete in the first robotics competition. And so as a consequence, early January, they would be building this robot part of the competition. So, and that was, to build a 50 to 60 kilo robot, industrial robot, which they would start about the first couple of days in January, and they would give up their school holidays. And this would keep going through till about mid-February. And then they would compete in Sydney in March. And so the idea is that they got confidence. Once the competition was over, we would run monthly to 6 weekly sort of meetings. Pardon me. So these were workshops so that the girls could come and try something else. So they would learn how to build a billy cart, or they would learn how to program pardon me, Arduinos, or different sorts of concepts. And the idea was to get them together so that they would still be meeting up, get the mentors involved, and also if there were new girls who weren't sure about, if this is something they want to try, they could come and try a workshop or two and see if that was something that was of interest. And so as we did that, we built this up, and the girls really enjoyed it, and we had a nice group following. And so the girls got to do this. It built their confidence. In 2017, the girls had an amazing win in Sydney, and as part of that win, they were able to go to Houston and compete in the World Championship. So that was absolutely amazing for their confidence, and they're just every aspect of them. They were just so happy to have experienced success from coming from being not knowing what they're doing to where they were. And one of the things that I do need to say is that with the RoboCats, our vision was slightly different in that we didn't come in with the vision that we wanted them to win. We wanted them to learn and understand the process and work together. We weren't from a school, we weren't homeschooling groups, we weren't from any particular place. We had girls from lots of different schools come in, and they were all thrown together, working together, and they had to sort of learn how to manage each other and also how to deal with adults. Whilst they thought they knew how to do that, they didn't realize that every adult has a different way of addressing. So we had an older gentleman who obviously expected a little bit more formality, whereas we had another one who was a lot more hip. We had students, uni students, who were like, hey, so they got to learn, they got to communicate, they had leadership experience, and so it was wonderful in that that perspective. And the students, the university students who were mentoring, they got to be mentored by industry mentors as well. So they found that they had opportunities through industry, and they also got opportunities to work with younger students as well. So it was a fantastic life cycle of mentorship amongst the different generations.
So I do try and select a picture that reflects the person that I'm speaking with. So I did put a world picture there of my daughter and my son. He's back there looking at the world. But you just touched on something that I think more schools are sort of starting to tap into, is the networking with the industry people and the partnerships. How important and how key, should that be for schools that are, forward thinking?
Look, I think it's very important because schools are not insular and they can't be seen as insular. It can't be seen as you come to school, you learn, and that's it. Learning is all about partnerships. We also know that Vygotsky said learning is a social experience. And so the best way to learn is learning within and outside as well. So partnerships are very important, and getting students to make these world connections and making connections outside, whether it's through volunteering, through different co-curricular activities, or just even making connections with universities and then opportunities arise. I think it's really important for students to tap into this, and by extension, schools as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So thank you for coming on Courageous Dialogues. Before you go, I asked this of everyone. What's a time that you were courageous, and what makes you say that?
You've got me there. Totally got me there. I don't really know. I'm not really sure. I think, if I'm I'm going to take a step back, maybe being courageous was starting the RoboCats and not entirely sure how it would turn out. And I had a vision, I had an idea. I also wanted to make sure that there were a few ideologies. One of them was that no student would be disadvantaged, so that any student who wanted to come in didn't have to pay, and I fulfilled that. So I think perhaps, doing something like this where I didn't probably realize how much of my time it would suck up as well. So it was being courageous, having this, this intervention, this program, and then probably not realizing that my family would probably not see me as much because I've been working with the kids and the mentors to get it off the ground. Thank you again for coming on Courageous Dialogues.